John 10:10, perhaps one of my favorite verses, and perhaps one of the transformative verses of the New Testament. It works in a sense as a fulcrum, as a balancing point of the book of John, and it's such a powerful, powerful passage to each one of us. And so as we get started, the question is, what is your life? And as you and I would say, life is blank, many of us would have a different thing to put in there, right? The great, great philosopher Forrest Gump said life is a box of chocolates. You'll never know what you get. Other people say life is like a box of cherries. Other people say life is hard. And many of us define life in a different way, and many of us think of life in so many different ways. People who are in Iran and Israel, people who are in Russia and Ukraine have a very different view of life than what we have here this morning, today. You and I have different stages of life, and you see life very differently if you're a teenager than you would if you're one of our brethren who have just turned 90, and many of those have done that last week and this next week. Many of us see life differently by the possessions we have, by the relationships we have, by our perceived success or perceived failure. Many of us, when we hear life is blank, we go back to the book of James and we remember that life is but a vapor. It's here today, but we don't know what's going to happen later. We don't know what tomorrow holds, and we know that we need to be careful when we plan things for tomorrow and plan things for next week and next month, because we don't even know we'll be here. We don't even know what our situation is. And so life, what is our life? How would you define yourself? I remember a good friend of mine many years ago. He started taking a lot of pictures of himself, always, doing selfies and taking pictures with his family and taking pictures of this and that, and it just seemed to become an obsession to him. And one time I was joking to him about how he loved pictures so much, and he said, well, I have to have something to be shown at my funeral. And he said, you know what, you go to a funeral and they have those slideshows, and he said, I realize there's not really any good pictures of me, so I'm preparing for my funeral with all these pictures that are here. When your funeral comes, what will be said about you? When you reach the old golden age, what will you look back on and see that was significant about your life? What stories are you going to tell your grandchildren? What stories are you going to tell your friends? What is your life? Now, of course, this morning you're in a church building, and so, of course, perhaps from this lesson, the perspective will be more from a spiritual standpoint and from a spiritual side. But we've got to be sure that we're living a life which God has planned for each and every one of us. And so let's go to our next slide and notice as Jesus begins this verse, he warns us. And he warns us that there are people who are going to waste your life. There are things that are going to waste your life. You see, the thief comes to steal and destroy. He says, but I've come that you may have life. Well, who is this thief? Contextually, looking at the book, we would say, okay, in John 10, Jesus is talking about these Pharisees who are here. These scribes and Pharisees who are fighting against Jesus, who want to follow anybody but Jesus. And so likely, Jesus is speaking about these folks. At least that's what the context looks like. But when you realize that John wrote this book 60 years later, and John, as an older man, is looking back, you can imagine as John is quoting Jesus, he's not just thinking about those Pharisees, that sect or group of Jews who had long passed away. He's thinking about all those other things that have stolen our life. One of those things that happens, and I wish I could schedule it for a different time because it always makes me feel guilty. I get a notification on my phone. And that notification comes invariably about the time that I'm taking the Lord's Supper on Sunday morning. And it says, you have spent so many hours on your phone. Maybe it says 3, maybe it says 4, maybe it says more than that. And it says that is more or less than last week or whatever else it may be. And it always makes me feel guilty because I realize instead of seeing God's creation, I'm looking at a 3x5 electronic device for those hours in a day. Sometimes I realize when I'm watching a Netflix show or watching something on TV and I've finished the first season, I look back and realize that was 13 hours of my life that I'll never get back. And it didn't end the way I wanted it to. As I go through and do this or that or whatever else it may be, I realize that the most important currency I have is not the dollar. It's not even my check card. The most important currency I have is every hour and minute of the day. So the question is, what is it stealing your life? What is it that's consuming you that may feel at the present so important, but after you've spent that time, you realize, oh, I've wasted. I've lost. As you go out to the graveyard out behind the building, and as you go through, and Marshall County and other places have so many graveyards and cemeteries, what you'll notice is there's the date of birth, there's the date of death, and there's that dash in the middle. And that dash, as you've heard oftentimes, represents life. And for some people, that dash is filled with stuff. And for some people, they just survived. And they didn't get any further. They didn't go any further than that. Jesus says that thief has come into your life to steal and to destroy. You know anybody who's destroyed their life? You know anybody who has lost major portions of their life because of decisions that they've made or because of things that have happened to them? The thief has come to steal and to destroy. But you were made for something greater than that. And God has brought you to such a time and such a place as this because He has a purpose for your life. He has a reason for your life. But if your life is to be what God has called it to be, you've got to watch those thieves. You've got to lock it up. You have got to maintain security and be sure that you are what God has intended for you to be. Don't let that thief come in and destroy. Well, what are some thieves that come in to destroy life? Well, I love in this idea to go back to the book of Ecclesiastes. Here you see the Kuloth, or that's what people call him. He's a preacher, most likely Solomon, writes a book later in life saying, this is how I lived, don't do this. This is how I lived, this is what I suggest. And as he goes through, he says, listen, you as a young man, you as a young lady, you're searching for meaning, you're searching for purpose. Let me tell you as the richest man who's alive. Let me tell you as the wisest man who is alive. Let me tell you as a man who has more wives and concubines than anybody else can imagine. Let me tell you about my experience. And we oftentimes will skip over to chapter 12 where it says your whole duty, your whole purpose, life is fearing God and keeping His commandments. For that's what you're put here on this earth to do. That's where you'll find fulfillment. But as we look through these thieves, let's look at them very quickly. Life is not found in pleasure. Ecclesiastes 1:8, the eye will never be satisfied with seeing. The ear will never be filled with hearing. You go on the most awesome vacation ever. And maybe you see the great icebergs. Maybe you see that beautiful beach. Maybe you go to Disney. Maybe you see the Grand Canyon. Maybe you go to foreign lands and see the tigers and see the lions. But then you got to come back home. Listen to me. Then you got to come back home and go to work. And we pursue pleasure. We pursue things which we think will satisfy. Man, just wait till I retire, we think. Just wait till I graduate, we think. Just wait till I get a better job. But those ideas of pleasure, while important, are not where we need to place our personality, not where we need to place our identity and our importance. Another thief is performance. Ecclesiastes 4:8. The man who has worked all of his life, and he says there's never an end to his labors. The workaholic, the guy who gets up at the break of dawn and works all the way to evening. The guy who even when he's home, his mind is thinking, how can I do my job better? How can I work this company in a greater way? And many people spend all their lives making an identity. Many people spend all their lives moving up that corporate ladder, moving up that chain, moving up. But the question is how you define success. And what does it mean to be truly successful? My identity is not based on my performance. Sometimes we see the bumper sticker, he who dies with the most things wins. But our possessions are a little bit more than thieves. Ecclesiastes 5:10, he who loves silver will never be fulfilled with just silver. He who loves abundance and increase will never be satisfied. How much money do you need? 4-letter word, more. How big of a house do you need? More. How many clothes do you need? More. And we say we need more of everything because if we find our identity, if we find our satisfaction, if we find our joy in the stuff that we have, there's always something more that we need. How about pursuits? Always chasing the next high. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 4, Solomon said, I made my works great. I built great houses. I planted great vineyards. But those pursuits, no matter how much he did, no matter how far he went beyond everybody else, it never lasted. At least his feelings about it never lasted. It was always, okay, what's next? People, we think, man, if I marry the right person, man, if I just have the right friends, man, if my kids will respect me and love me and care about me. But the problem with people is we are all infallible. And so you can't place your identity in people because people change. In Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 15, Solomon says, I saw the living who walk under the sun, and there were always a second one who's standing next in place. What's he saying there? He's saying, Mark, you may be a preacher, but if you're gone, they're going to find another preacher in the next week, maybe quicker than that. He's saying, you know what, you've got this great job, but when you leave, somebody's going to fill your place and they're going to do an even better job. He's saying, listen, you know, you may feel important in the role in which you play in the family, but those things pass. They are temporary. Don't place your identity there. So we go through that list, and what you and I so much in a worldly sense, and sometimes in a somewhat spiritual sense, place our identity in, place our importance in, say, okay, this is who I am, and this is what brings me happiness and pleasure. Jesus says those are thieves. And they are breaking in and distracting you from what's really important. Now, relationships matter. The people you place yourself around, very important. Pursuit, we've been put on this earth to work. You are to pursue greater things. There's nothing wrong with wanting a pay raise. There's nothing wrong with wanting a better job. All these things are good. God has placed that hunger in you, but it can't be your identity. It can't be who you are. God has made you for something greater. God has made you for something more. So watch those thieves and keep those thieves out of your life. Don't let them overwhelm what really matters. All right, let's go to our next slide. Jesus says, I have come that they may have life. Jesus is the source of life. And you cannot find true life apart from God and apart from the relationship that you have with Him. And now, as you look at that, you see some passages. And in each one of these passages, Jesus mentions life, right? John 11:25, Jesus says, I am, this is in the context of Lazarus being raised. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. In John 10:10, Jesus says, I've come that you may have life and you may have it more abundantly. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And so this morning, if you feel that hole within your heart, if you see that you have pursued earthly pursuits, physical pursuits, without placing God in the center point of your life, I can tell you where to look. It's Jesus. He is the source. And you're not going to find what you were created for. You're not going to find true life until you come to Jesus. Until you have Jesus within your heart. Until you are following Him first and foremost above all things. Jesus is life. Now, opening up the context, looking there in John 10:1-10, notice what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about the relationship of the sheep and the shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the door. And he says the sheep know me by name and the sheep love me. Let's talk for a second about that relationship that you are to have with Jesus. First and foremost, when you think about this relationship which is here, think about God as your shepherd, Jesus as your shepherd. The shepherd loves his sheep. He is infatuated with them. That's all he ever thinks about is his sheep. And as you look at Psalm 23, David, out there in the field, writes to God, and he sees this relationship that's here as he looks at his sheep. And he says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall never want for anything. He feeds me. He lays me beside those still waters. He follows me even through the valley of death. He takes care of me no matter what. Have you ever seen some people and their dog? Now, of course, this is not me, at least I hope. But there's some people who, they dress their dog. They feed their dog food more expensive than what they eat. They talk to their dog and they think that their dog understands and listens and cares. They have that relationship with their dog. And it's such an interesting relationship which people will have. Some people are that way. Well, if you think about that relationship that somebody has with their dog or somebody has with their cat, multiply that times 10, and that's what God is with you. He provides for you. He takes care of you. He cares for you in everything that you do. And he gets mad, Ezekiel 34, at selfish shepherds, people who take advantage of his sheep, because there's nothing to him more special and more precious than his sheep. In Matthew 9:36, we see where Jesus, looking at the crowds, it says he has compassion. That word compassion literally is his bowels are twisted. Imagine a knot in your stomach. You see it when somebody you love is going through something and your body just feels compressed because you're hurting. That's how Jesus feels for his sheep, because he sees them as sheep without a shepherd. We look in Luke 15 and we see that love where Jesus, the shepherd, is willing to forego the 99. He's willing to get rid of everything because he wants that one lost sheep. Because that's what he loves more than anything in the world. The shepherd loves his sheep. And how that translates to today, we're not farmers necessarily today, here we are. How that translates to today is there's nothing in this world God loves more than you. And there's nothing in this world that God cares about more than you. Even while we're yet sinners, Christ would die for us. For God so loved the entire world that he gave his only begotten Son. He made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. No one in this world loves you more than God. And as a shepherd, he cares for his sheep. He lays down his life for the sheep. He is obsessed with his sheep. And then we look at it from the perspective of the sheep. And as Jesus is describing it here in John 10, he says, you know what? The sheep know the shepherd's voice. They recognize how the shepherd talks, and they go to the shepherd. Other people may be calling their sheep out, but every sheep knows who its owner is and is dedicated to Jesus. Dedicated to his master. Dedicated above all else. That sheep loves the shepherd. They follow him. No matter where it goes, no matter how difficult it is, because they know the shepherd loves them, because they know the shepherd provides, they will follow that shepherd everywhere. The sheep trust the shepherd. So this morning, as we look at this, where's your source of life? Where's your source of true identity? Have you found it in Jesus? Do you have this kind of relationship that the sheep have for the shepherd? And do you recognize how the shepherd loves the sheep? Because that's the key to life that we're looking at here in John 10:10. That relationship of knowing the only hope, the only source, the only way is through Jesus. We have to put him first. But let's look at this word life. Let's go to our next slide here. Now, this is an old preaching tool, and before we get started, preachers sometimes pull out the Greek because that's what the New Testament is written in, and we're trying to make a point with this or that or whatever else. And what happens oftentimes is we don't know Greek as well as we want to, perhaps. As you look at these words here, Zoe and Bios and Zoe, we oftentimes will parse them down for two different meanings. Now, as I say this, realize sometimes this doesn't work as well as we want it to, okay? And there are some passages, John 16:25, Philippians 1:20, James 4, verse 14, where this doesn't work because those passages use the word Zoe as what we are about to say Bios represents. And so it's not always 100% correct. Another weakness of this analogy or study here is John likes only the word Zoe as life. He doesn't really use the word Bios. But now all those disclaimers are there. Three major words, there's 6 words in Greek, but 3 major words we care about life in the New Testament. First word is psyche, P-S-Y-C-H-A-E. That's a rough transliteration. That's talking about our spirit, the spirit or the soul which lies within us. But that's not what we're looking at here in John 10:10. What we're looking at here in John 10:10 is this word Zoe. But to illustrate Zoe, let's look at the word Bios. You can remember this because bios is where we get our word biology. And here's the point I want to make. A lot of people who are living today are doing nothing more than just physically living. The heart's beating, respiratory is happening, blood is circulating, the brain on special occasions is working. But they're doing nothing more than just being alive. And there's a lot of people in foreign countries who, times are tough, right? Maybe they're living in a famine. Maybe they're living through a plague. Maybe they're living in a war zone, and they're just alive, and that's all they're consumed with. There's a lot of people here in Marshall County, they're just alive. If they have a desire, they go fill that desire because, hey, it's life. It's life. There's really no self-discipline. We're just going to do it. There's a lot of people who are going through life, and there's so many things happening, and there's so many struggles going on that they're just focused on, let's just make it to tomorrow. Let's just survive, and we're just going to make it. There's a lot of people who are just punching their ticket. They're here on this earth. No rhyme nor reason for their existence. They're just here until the Lord calls them home. That's the bios that we're talking about. The biology. They're alive, but they're really not. Their heart is beating, but there is no purpose. There is no reason for them to be on this earth. Don't have just a bios life. God has put you here for a greater reason than this. Now, contrasted to the bios, Jesus here, and John using this gospel here, focuses on the word Zoe. There's a lot of girls named Zoe, and this is the reason, okay? Because that's life with a purpose. That's life with quality. That's life with reason. You see, Jesus says, I've come that you may have life. He's not talking about you're alive, you're dead. He's saying, I've come that your quality of life may be worth it. That it may be worth it for you to go through what you're going through because of him, because of Jesus. Do you have purpose? Now, I'm not talking about, man, I'm going to go to McDonald's after lunch or after church. It's going to be awesome. I'm talking about, do you have real purpose for your life? Is your life making a difference? Are you fulfilling God's reason for you to be here? Providentially, Esther chapter 4 and verse 14. Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20. God has placed you here for this reason. People may mean these things for evil. God means these things for good. Zoe. You look over in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. In that passage, kind of depending on the translation you have, but that passage says, you once were dead, but now you have been made alive. Now, we really focus in Ephesians chapter 2 on verses 8 and 9 because it tells us about grace. We really focus in Ephesians 2 about verse 10 because it talks about where his workmanship, God working through us. We really focus on verse 14 where he talks about how he's joined all people, both Jew and Greek, into one church. But perhaps one of the more significant passages in chapter 2 of Ephesians is that first verse. You were dead. You were just bios. You were just a living lump of clay. But now you've been made alive. Now you've been given purpose. Now you've been placed here upon this earth for a reason. Now that life comes when we give ourselves to the Lord. You see, we're all, looking at Ephesians 2:1, dead spiritually in our sin until we're made alive when we obey the gospel. Just as Genesis says God breathed into their nostrils life, in Acts 2:38 we see those who are baptized receive that gift of the Spirit, that breathing of the Spirit within them. And so each one of us are made biologically alive, and then we as Christians are made Zoe alive when we obey the gospel. We are given purpose. We are given reason to live. Now let's go to our very last slide. The thief does not come except to kill and destroy. But I have come, Jesus says, that they may have life and they may have it abundantly. Now we as preachers in this comfortable situation, comfortable building here, comfortable life, say become a Christian because it's awesome for what it does to your marriage. 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 through 7. Become a Christian because that makes you a better person at work. 1 Peter chapter 2. Become a Christian because all blessings are found in Christ. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3. But I want you to recognize that many of the people who Jesus is speaking to here, the apostles, the disciples who are listening, when he says, I've come that you may have life and you may have it more abundantly, many of the people who heard that and obeyed that were starved, were persecuted, were martyred and put to death because of their faith. Many of the people who heard this lived what we would call miserable lives as refugees, leaving their homes, leaving their jobs, sometimes leaving their families because of the faith. And yet Jesus says that life which you have is abundant. I'm not saying today if you become a Christian, all your problems will vanish, because they're not going to. I'm not saying, man, if you become a Christian, that Zoe life is going to make it where you always understand and life is perfect. But Jesus says, I'm the source of life. And if you come to me, if you obey me, I will make it where your life is worth it. Now, in my study for this passage, I ran across an illustration. It's a blog or a Substack somebody had written. I don't remember the name, or I tell you. But they were talking about this idea of Zoe and the idea of how it worked. And they said, go on a vacation. They were on their honeymoon. They went on vacation and they were flying, commercial class. And the steward found out that they had just gotten married. And he said, this is your honeymoon. So he took them from the commercial class and put them all the way up over here in first class. And they're in these large couch-like chairs, and they have all that they can eat, all they can drink. Everything is wonderful. And he said, in a sense, that's what Zoe is about. We start the plane ride same time. We finish the plane ride same time. But boy, the trip is so much better. Jesus has come, not that you may live physically forever. Jesus has come that you may have an abundant life, that your life may have better quality, that your life may be so much better.